Welcome back, everybody, for the final time to the St. Louis Cardinals franchise on MLB The Show 24. This was a really fun run, building up the Cardinals for a few years and turning them into the eventual World Series winners. In this final episode, we are going to go through the future years in the series. I do have a couple years in here of managing the roster a bit and trying to set them up in good shape before letting the CPU take over. We'll take a look at the final stats and how the careers of some of these players unfold. There are some surprises in here, some pretty fun ones. But I want to thank you all for the support in this series. It was a really fun time, and I've enjoyed playing more of the show these last 2 years. And I'll be back for a new series again when MLB 25 drops. But let's go through the final episode with the St. Louis Cardinals and celebrate the conclusion of another franchise. We pick things up right at the end of year 5. The Cardinals are World Series champions, and the team I've constructed has come together perfectly. So many free agent moves and trades ended up paying off in a massive way. And at the same time, players like Nolan Gorman and Jordan Walker have developed as well as you could have hoped. When I took over the Cardinals initially, I did think there was a chance that we would see the team get worse before getting better. But players like Brendan Donovan, Walker, and Gorman made the transition a lot easier. Lars Nootbaar included. There were some really good players I wasn't all that familiar with, and it really kept me from needing to rely much on the draft class, and that's where I want to go in a different direction with my next series. We barely got Daryl Moreno and Benny Matsumoto at the majors, only a couple seasons. And the number 1 pick in the series, Steve Padilla, ended up being traded to go and get Geraldo Perdomo. So the build was very different in this series compared to that of the A's franchise. The team was still a lot of fun to play with, though, especially with Nolan Gorman becoming not just a franchise caliber player, but an MVP caliber player as well. And those playoff runs were absolutely legendary. Jordan Walker is a 92 overall at 25 years old, up significantly from where this series began. So how easy would it be to keep all this talent together with high-priced free agents and players about to hit free agency? This next offseason would give us challenges right off the bat. Nolan Gorman, JoJo Romero, Corbin Burnes, Brendan Donovan, series mainstays were hitting free agency. Obviously, I want to keep around Nolan Gorman and see where he ends up going in his career. JoJo Romero was one of the best pitchers in the franchise. I offered him a contract along with Ryan Helsley, who's given us a roller coaster ride but ended up closing out the final game of our World Series season. JoJo Romero ends up turning our offer down, actually, and took a 4-year deal to go to Seattle instead. At 32 years old, I don't like signing those kind of deals, so the Mariners went out and we end up instead bringing back Gorman, Burnes, and Brendan Donovan. Gorman is now signed for 5 years at $21 million a year. That's another thing in the show, is keeping around players isn't all that difficult at times. So the pitching staff would start to look a little bit differently. Now that Benny Matsumoto is at the majors, I wanted him to become a regular starter. We see the Dodgers here go and acquire Tommy Edman, just as they did in real life, of course. And Gunnar Henderson will now go to Atlanta, just like Adley Rutschman did. That is a $40 million a year deal. The Rockies signed Spencer Torkelson. Now, why is that a major move? Why did that make the video? You will see later on. Here's what we did during this first offseason. Nothing really extraordinary. When we have so many high-priced players and we're trying to keep around players hitting free agency, it doesn't leave a lot of money to explore other options unless we're making serious overhauls. And why would we when the roster is in this kind of shape? The bullpen was going to look differently in this next season, but that was the main thing. We have Benny Matsumoto now a starting pitcher. We didn't have to make any serious changes to the actual lineup. So here is the depth chart going into 2029. It's basically the same team in a lot of ways. And I just wanted to see how Matsumoto would now develop and where he would end up going in this rotation. There were also some players I was intrigued with. Mikey Deal here was a second-round pick in that Year 5 draft. He's an 80 overall with 83 potential, so I knew he could have an impact in this future as well. So here we're at the All-Star break, okay? And Benny Matsumoto, he does not have a great first half. He got rocked and gave up a bunch of home runs in that first half. Now, Nolan Gorman did end up hitting 25 home runs at the break, and after becoming the Home Run Derby champion in the last year of the series, he goes to defend his title. Gorman in round number 1. He's going to get things underway here with a 458-foot blast and ends up hitting 20 in round 1, setting a pretty difficult mark for Juan Soto to beat. Soto would get his chance, but wouldn't even put up half the home runs necessary. Gorman wins in a blowout fashion, 20-8, and moves on to round number 2, where he would then face Corey Seager. Nolan Gorman only 14 this time, but has an opposite field gap home run to make it 15. Seager follows, needs one to tie it as time is expiring, and he connects to force an overtime against Nolan Gorman. They would each get 1 minute. Gorman hits 4 in his. Corey Seager, meanwhile, 3 halfway through, and then launches one deep down the right field line. This ties it. He'd have a few swings to win it, and would only need 1 more. He knocks out Nolan Gorman in the second round with this 5th home run. The champion is dethroned, and Corey Seager becomes the new Home Run Derby champion in the following season. We would have a lot of All-Stars this year, with Nestor Cortez earning an appearance this time, along with Mason Miller. And I guess they only actually have 1 true reliever that gets in. Otherwise, it's 6 closers. That's really odd. But Ryan Helsley does get in, as he's once again named the closer. Gorman and Brandon Marsh are also All-Stars. By the end of this year, the Cardinals go on to win 105 games, hoping to repeat as World Series champions. The home run numbers are great for Brandon Marsh and Nolan Gorman. They each hit 38. For Gorman, it's his lowest mark in 3 years. Luis Robert hits 24. No one else gets to 20. Kind of surprising that only 3 end up getting to that mark. But you have players like Lars Nootbaar showing more regression. And then players like Tommy Troy, who are really in make-or-break seasons, end up having a really big year. Troy goes to an 87 overall at 27. I've seen so many players in his exact position just stagnate, and they don't go anywhere in their career, but he actually has that breakout. Tink Hence now, he is at an 80, but he has still yet to really follow up that Rookie of the Year season with anything close to it. While Benny Matsumoto didn't have a great first half of the year, but was better in the second. Overall, a great year again for St. Louis. While we go through these future years, also keep in mind how good our farm system has been. There were more prospects that I was hoping would be in position to take over spots before I let this team go. I had always wanted to see players like Steve Padilla and Jesus Fernandez carve out roles, but it just wasn't able to happen in 5 years of franchise, especially when those guys weren't even taken in the first offseason or anything. So we go to the postseason. We go and beat the Pittsburgh Pirates. That gets us to the NLCS as we look for a World Series return. But we dropped the first 3 to the Giants, scoring 3 runs and then getting shut out in 2 games. We would end up forcing, though, a Game 7. They win 3. We win 3. Benny Matsumoto gives us a chance in Game 7 against former Cardinals ace Jack Flaherty. Only one can go to the World Series. Dylan Cease takes the mound, and the Giants get after him early, hitting 3 home runs in the second inning. And meanwhile, Jack Flaherty was shutting down his former team. We go into the 8th inning. We have a 4% chance of victory. Luis Robert skies one. This is down the line. And keep in mind, Flaherty has a no-hitter in the making. We don't have a run, we don't have a hit, and the season is on the line. Brendan Donovan grounds out, and we go to the 9th. Flaherty facing Geraldo Perdomo, and that is down the line. It breaks up the no-hitter after 8 no-hit innings. But we still need 4 runs. Tommy Troy hits one to left center. It gets run down. Nolan Gorman, you want him up in this spot, and he chases a curveball low. Brandon Marsh rolls it over, and the Giants take home the NL pennant. What a performance from Jack Flaherty. It is still a complete game shutout against the 105-win defending champions. What a way for it to end. Now, the Angels would go on to beat them in the World Series. And we'll take a look at some of these teams that end up winning. There were a lot of surprises that went down. So we go past that year, and the next season gives us Jordan Walker as a free agent. And obviously, he's become a player we don't want to let leave. I wasn't sure what would happen there. Daryl Moreno ended up being our first-round pick in year 2, and I always thought he would be a future starter there, but Walker had just been way too good. And we already had a DH in Nolan Gorman. So in this offseason, I was still looking to keep a lot of these players in place. I didn't feel like enough roles were ready to be taken over by young players. And this is a team I'm still trying to see win championships. Newt Barr's down to an 82, Ryan Helsley down to a 77. So some of these decisions did end up getting a little more challenging. I did look to bring back Helsley, though, because the offer wasn't going to be too much. But I wanted to have Nolan Gorman now in a spot to just DH and not really mess around there at second base. So we offer a contract to Brewers second baseman Bryce Terang. Most of our offers are just going to players with expiring deals already on the team. I was also keeping in mind future starters at pitcher. I thought Rolando Benitez was a player I wanted to have on the fast track to a starting spot. We end up getting Bryce Terang. Dylan Carlson then signs a big 3-year deal with the Rays, and Mason Wynn leaves in free agency to the Toronto Blue Jays. It just never panned out with him the way it did for Jordan Walker, not even close. I was as patient as I possibly could have been. He gets a modest 4-year deal, and his time in St. Louis is over. Meanwhile, Jordan Walker, who was in such a similar spot at the series beginning, ends up getting the massive extension. Brendan Donovan goes, and he ends up in Tampa because Tommy Troy broke out last year, and despite Donovan coming off a fantastic year, this seemed like the right time to move on because of Troy's breakout and the opposite directions those careers were heading. At the same time, I wanted Steve Padilla to take over for Lars Nootbaar. As difficult of a decision that was. I also wanted Mikey Dio to get ready for a major league career, and I felt like he could do that Victor Scott role and just give us a younger version of it with starting upside. So going into this next season, there weren't a ton of overhauls, but Terang, Padilla, and Troy would look to be new starters, while we bring in Yuki Matsui to help shore up the bullpen a bit. We end up going off to a great start, 60-38 in this year. Nolan Gorman is still doing his thing with 27 home runs. And Benny Matsumoto is beginning to come into his own and settle in as a dominant pitcher. Took a couple years, but now he's an 88. We see Jordan Walker go to the All-Star game this season, along with Gorman. Here we see I am still trying to remain patient with Tank Hentz, but it's just not working. He had that Rookie of the Year season, and nothing since then has been good enough. Tommy Troy has a bit of a cold first half. He's hitting .234, but for players like him and Padilla, I was going to let them have time to settle in, and for Padilla, it happened very quickly. With the struggles that Tink Hence was seeing, I felt like I wanted to give Matt Waldron a chance. We didn't really have budget to go and seek out much at the trade deadline, so we stayed put basically, win the division again, but Waldron was even worse than Tink Hence. So this solved nothing. I ended up reverting back to Hence in the rotation when we made it to the postseason. Nolan Gorman is now a 92 overall, and the power can somehow get better. The ratings are up. He's back in the 40s this season. Bryce Terang mashed all year, slugging .506. And by the end of Tommy Troy's first year starting, he had really put it all together with a .412 slugging, 3.5 WAR. Not bad, continuing that progress from the season prior. Benny Matsumoto would now be an 88 overall. But our season would end pretty quickly, getting swept in the wildcard round. The Giants beat us again. And Corbin Burns, along with Trevor Stephan, had a rough outing. Our pitching wasn't great in that deciding game, as the Diamondbacks go and win the World Series this season, with the likes of Bo Bichette and Shane Bieber helping out their rebuild. So it's now 2 years after the World Series win. Steve Padilla has basically gotten up to where Lars Nootbaar was rating-wise and wins Rookie of the Year, the third rookie to do it in this series. I felt like we were going to see some changes in this offseason with Victor Scott and Tink Hence potentially. I was thinking about what we could do at those positions. Jordan Walker now becomes the highest rated player on the team. He is a 97. Here we see in the offseason, Dylan Cease exercises his option while Brandon Marsh declines his, giving us some more work to do here, having to now sign a 33-year-old outfielder to a multi-year deal. Not the most convenient thing to do. Geraldo Perdomo then decides to decline his option. And this was a spot where I felt like I had a big decision to make, because I didn't feel like Jesus Fernandez was quite ready yet, and Perdomo was so good. I actually attempted to sign Mackenzie Gore in this offseason. He ended up turning us down, instead going to the Texas Rangers. The fallback option then was to go and get Pablo Lopez, coming off a really good year, and Tink Hence would still be in this rotation, at least initially. I looked at trade options for Victor Scott because I wanted Mikey Deal to take over that bench outfield position, so I did get a good second base prospect in return, sending him to the White Sox. I also brought back Geraldo Perdomo just on a one-year deal, and that 1 year was meant to try to bridge the gap between him and Jesus Fernandez. Otherwise, nothing major happened in the offseason, but I felt it was time to look at trading Tink Hence, because we need to make sure this rotation is in good shape. And that's when I found Christopher Thorpe, a player with 1 year until free agency, 88 overall, and he's consistently put up solid numbers. Maybe not elite, but his best baseball could be ahead of him still. So I offered the Nationals Tink Hence and two really good prospects in Matt Grieve and Travis Chassin. And that gave us a new pitcher in Christopher Thorpe and ended the Tink Hence saga. So I've already moved off of a lot of players that were on the World Series team but were more role players or bench players. I felt this was a really good team to try to get back to the World Series again. And they certainly got off to a hot start. This rotation looked like it was going to be revamped, as Benny Matsumoto ended up making it to his first All-Star game, getting the second most votes at starting pitcher. Richard Leonard is an All-Star. I drafted him because we won Rookie of the Year with Dylan Lesko. That was our luxury selection. And now he is a closer for us, or a reliever, makes it to the All-Star game. Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman are also All-Stars, along with Brandon Marsh. What a signing he's been. Christopher Thorpe ends up having a year that's pretty similar to what he was doing with the Nationals, and I felt that would be good enough to extend him. But the Pablo Lopez signing was terrible. He went down 4 overall, and it happened that Rolando Benitez ratings now were starting to catch up, and it was time to give him a chance in the rotation. And that would help us go on to win 108 games this time around, even better than 105 this season previous. And we're seeing us just dominate offensively with one of the best pitching staffs at the same time. #1 in team ERA. Benny Matsumoto is now the ace. Christopher Thorpe looks really good. And this entire rotation came together. Rolando Benitez was the right move at this time to replace Pablo Lopez. We see Steve Padilla, the Rookie of the Year. He's now an 82 overall. Jordan Walker gets up to a 98, hitting 42 home runs this season. This would also be a year where he would be named Most Valuable Player. Tommy Troy, 34 home runs. This was one of the best home run hitting teams this entire time. Troy continues to break out. Marsh hits 30 home runs. 4 players go 30 plus. And that really speaks for itself, even when players like Luis Robert are beginning to decline. Mikey Deal playing that Victor Scott role, maybe not the same stolen base threat, still a good one, but the bat looked better off the bat. So we would go to the NLDS and get matched up with the LA Dodgers, and we took care of them in 4 games. This was the deciding game, winning 4-3. Gorman goes yard. Benny Matsumoto gets the start. And then we face the Arizona Diamondbacks looking for the pennant. And this here is game 6. Matsumoto takes the mound. It is a pitcher's duel early on. But once we get to the 5th inning, I do not have that quick hook on Benny Matsumoto, and he gives up 5 singles. The Diamondbacks build up a bit of a lead. We're forced to come from behind, season on the line once again. Tommy Troy broke out this year. He had a triple to pull us within 1. And then in the 9th, all-star reliever Richard Leonard gives up 3 straight hits. The Diamondbacks get 2. We are able to answer. Steve Padilla, the young guns, are getting us back in this. They're delivering some hope, but it takes 2 more in the 9th inning. Walker grounds out. We do get Gorman, but he pops it up into shallow center field. And again, the St. Louis Cardinals are unable to make it back to the World Series. They lose the pennant to the Arizona Diamondbacks. Pretty heartbreaking games as well here that we lost. So back to the drawing board again. We have to extend Christopher Thorpe now. That was a really nice trade for us. And that gives us a boosted rotation. He is an 87 overall. We also have Tommy Troy now hitting free agency. He peaks at just the right time. 93 overall, 30 years old, and really gives you good defense, great hitting. I'm just not used to seeing players in Troy's position break out like this. It really does come out of nowhere. 2 great seasons. He turned that corner and gets a 4-year offer from us. Geraldo Perdomo coming off another great year as our shortstop, though, would not be brought back. I looked to have Jesus Fernandez instead take over. 9 years younger, 4 overall lower. He would get an entire year to work on his defense and progress. Now was certainly the time. And then for Benny Matsumoto, now that he had become the ace as a 93, the writing was very much on the wall that it was time to give him that long-term extension or wait and have it be even more expensive. My thought was that I could make this a 10-year back-loaded deal, which would give us Benny for the long haul, but also reduce the amount of money we'd spend in the short term. We kick it all down the road as we look to win a World Series here in the next handful of years. We do bring back Troy and Thorpe, but now see Matthew Liberatore exit. He was awesome for us, especially in the postseason. He is now in the Miami Marlins organization. I actually had to increase the offer a couple times on Benny. I promised him the ace role, backloaded it, and for $195 million over 10 years, we get it done. And the salaries the next 2 years under $15 million to me were really reasonable. Now we see Victor Scott's getting 4 years, $42 million. What happened? Those numbers are actually pretty solid. We traded Scott to Chicago, where he became an everyday player. He slugged 400 plus, stole 20 bases, and had a great season. Now he cashes in. And it's not with us. Here's a look at our depth chart now. Seeing Julian Walsh now called up to the bigs, and Jesus Fernandez, the everyday shortstop. Game 1, actually, opening day, gives us a matchup I did not expect. It's Benny Matsumoto and Tank Hentz. Hentz, after being traded to Washington, was basically still the same guy that he was with us. His numbers did get better, but I don't think they were dramatically better. He ends up getting the opening day nod and pitches a gem against us as the Nationals win 2-1. He outduels Benny Matsumoto. So I thought that was a pretty cool storyline, even with it going against us. But we'd still win 97 games and take home the NL Central for yet another season. You bet we scored the most runs in all of baseball, hitting the second most home runs, with a pitching staff that was still top 5 in team ERA. The Cardinals still have that championship window wide open. Luis Robert hits 43 homers, Jordan Walker 37, Gorman a solid 30 home runs once again. But this had really become Jordan Walker's team, a move that I guess I could have seen coming had I not just been laser focused on Gorman's dominance. But here is Benny Matsumoto. Everything looks good outside of the major injury he suffered toward the end of the year. A head fracture would knock him out for the rest of the season. 5 to 6 month injury recovery timeline. So we're trying to win a World Series, and a guy we expected to be a part of that would not be available. We take on the New York Mets and sweep them in the NLDS. We get a rematch against the Arizona Diamondbacks, and here is a 12-2 win, or 12-4 win. We got Padilla and Tommy Troy mashing. We score 12 runs, and we sweep them on our way to the World Series to face the New York Yankees. We had won 7 games in a row to begin this postseason run. We then win the next 2, go to the Bronx, win that one. Now we just need one more win, and we can not only sweep the World Series, but the entire postseason. They can't even beat us when they rock our starter for 5 runs in the first. We came back and still won by 6. That's the juggernaut the St. Louis Cardinals become in this franchise. And they are now only 1 win away from becoming World Series champions again. We put up 6 runs in the first 3 innings. And now in a 1-run ball game, Luis Robert with a base hit tacks on a run. We go bottom of the 5th inning. Anthony Volpe trying to bring the Yankees back. Hits a solo shot off Carlos Miranda. So we insert Reggie Crawford, the 2-way reliever. He's had a really good season. Crawford strikes out Brooks Lee, ending a Yankee rally. The lead is 1. Here is Steve Padilla grounding it just under the glove at first base. Cardinals have first and second. Tommy Troy, already 3 for 3, sends one deep left field, make it a 4-hit game. Tommy Troy becoming a superstar and builds this lead to 3. Troy becoming a star was pretty far from my mind entering this long-term sim. Luis Robert, we know he can perform in the World Series, and he gets the infield hit. 9-6, and this is Julian Welsh. He joins the fun, singled through the middle, tacking on another run. Welsh was the first-round pick in Season 4. Meanwhile, Geraldo Perdomo is now a Yankee. Skies one, and it's run down by Roberts. In the 6th inning, Yankees needing something here, down 4 with 2 on, but another good job by Crawford keeping him off the board. 8th inning, Tommy Troy thinks he has his 5th hit, but it's foul. And not only that, I think it traveled like 240 feet. I have never seen that no doubt animation on a hit like that into foul territory. Now it's Luis Robert, and that one is a no-doubter. And it's fair. The St. Louis Cardinals up 3-0 in the series build up another big lead on the Yankees. Mason Miller, what a pitch, striking out his old teammate in Perdomo. And then facing Vinny Pasquantino, grounded out to Jordan Walker, and the MVP seals it as the Cardinals win their World Series again. It was, of course, satisfying to earn the first World Series in this franchise, but to then see the core with some of those players we never really got to see, plug in some gaps, and bring this team back to the World Series and win it all again in even more impressive fashion is pretty cool. And they sweep the entire postseason. Never thought I would see that, not losing a single game. This Cardinals team is so good. I did not see them becoming a dynasty or a juggernaut like this, especially so quickly. And what a breakout for Tommy Troy here in the long-term sim. Luis Robert is the World Series MVP, and Brandon Marsh is the postseason MVP. And the Cardinals win 2 rings in the matter of 5 seasons. This team actually has a fair amount of players from the year 4 draft on roster, with Welsh, Leonard, Christopher Rodriguez. He's there under Jordan Walker as a backup first baseman. But at this point, I felt it was time to let this go and let the CPU handle like 99% of the work. I was going to interfere with some of the free agent stuff to try to bring back certain players I wanted to see stick around, like Nolan Gorman. Remember when I signed him for $21 million a year earlier? Well, it didn't work out that way this time. Mason Miller does exit, he goes to the Brewers, but I was busy signing Nolan Gorman to a $31 million a year deal because the Mets and Red Sox had basically run up the negotiations so much I had to do it. So that took up a lot of our salary, obviously, but we plugged in some gaps with Colton Cowser and Daniel Espino in the offseason. Cardinals win 86 games this time, a lot lower than you'd think, and they don't win the division. Nolan Gorman belts 46 home runs. We do end up back in the postseason, and at this point, Jesus Fernandez has become the superstar shortstop. 29 home runs, hitting .320, nearly an 8-WAR player. Looking at these stats, you can definitely see the regression of this team, with age catching up to players like Jordan Walker and not seeing nearly the same home run numbers that we did in the previous years. Benny Matsumoto is still excellent. The rotation looks good overall, but the Daniel Espino signing might not have worked out that great. This was the year the pitching really fell off. The offense was still upper tier, but now we're more of a mid-tier pitching team. And that doesn't allow us to stick around in the postseason for very long, as we get eliminated by the Philadelphia Phillies in the wild card round. The Kansas City Royals go on to win the World Series this season, with Bobby Witt and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. finding himself in Kansas City for a title. In the offseason, we see 3 players go to the Hall of Fame, and that was something I was going to pay attention to, especially with some of our players like Nolan Gorman. But in this year's free agency, Daryl Moreno would become available. And he really didn't quite become the player I wanted him to. He's still a good starter. Definitely somebody you want on your team, but not a superstar. And we let him go. He ends up with the Reds on a pretty team-friendly deal. Our team is starting to look a little bit different, especially in the outfield, with Jackson Merrill also coming in. These are moves that I did not make at this point. Norris Sullivan is still on the team, though. He has somehow stuck around for all this time. Basically, this series version of Luis Estrella. We get a first-round exit against the Diamondbacks again. We do see Jesus Fernandez back up his 7.9 WAR season with another very similar. Norris Sullivan this year had actually gotten to be a starter for about half the season and played really well. So perhaps the draft pick has been justified. Nolan Gorman is down to a 90, but is still hitting 40-plus home runs a season. Jordan Walker is down to a 94. He sees his numbers drop off from his MVP seasons. He won 2 MVPs. But we do end up signing him to an extension. I can't believe it's for $18 million a year. A lot of these years we're going to go through extremely quickly, as I just wanted to see the depth chart every year and what would really change, and then check on some players. It was fun seeing players like Lionel Shed, players I had ideas for early in the season, have a chance to now get in. We go back to the postseason as a wild card team. The Brewers now win it with 103 victories. And they have players like Ethan Salas coming over from the Padres. I don't recognize a lot of this team, but I wanted to see players that were with us who were now on these winning organizations. Tekoa Roby was traded in the Luis Robert deal. Things did not work out there, and he just didn't develop very well in the franchise. And this year, Nolan Gorman finally sees his power come down to a more regular human level. Only 23 home runs compared to the 40-plus he usually hits. Jesus Fernandez, still high average, 17 homers. Tommy Troy, he's belting 30 home runs again. Jordan Walker, 33. Meanwhile, Daryl Moreno was traded actually to the Houston Astros, and he would put together the best year of his career, slugging .515, hitting .301 with 20-plus homers. We'd make it back to the postseason, but get knocked out again pretty quickly. I was surprised at how many quick exits we had in the postseason. The Brewers win the division and they win the World Series this year. And free agency would have us now seeing Steve Padilla and Tommy Troy become available. And both of them would leave town and sign with the Padres to be their 2 top-rated players. That doesn't happen very often. Not sure why we couldn't keep him around, but it was certainly tough paying aging stars like Walker and Gorman to keep around the younger players as well. So the team shows even more turnover going into the next year. We have players I have never heard of before in this franchise now on starting roles. Nolan Gorman is now just the DH. We come back to win the division with 90 victories in this season. Gorman only hits 13 home runs. That's so sad. But he does get to 496. Jordan Walker is now an 84 overall. Not quite the highest rated player on the team any longer, but still a very good starter. We would go to the NLCS and lose it in Game 7 to the San Francisco Giants. Meanwhile, in San Diego, there was a playoff season, and Padilla and Troy both did play pretty well. Padilla is the one I'm kind of sad we did not keep around. He was someone I drafted back in year 2. He was the younger player. Tommy Troy at 34 years old, not as heartbreaking, but he does decline after so many good years with us. The Twins go and win the World Series this time around against the Giants. And we can check on some of these retirements and have finalized numbers for a lot of the series stars. Brendan Donovan was one of my favorites. He became that on-base machine that I love having in my franchises. That guy is always going to be a favorite. And then Lars Nootbaar, who was just a great, well-rounded player for a number of years. He ends up with 167 home runs, a very solid career. There is even more roster turnover as Dylan Lesko makes his way to the Braves. We see Gorman now, 79 overall. That's tough. And the team just doesn't seem nearly as stacked as they once did. That's leading to us only winning 76 games this year, a very mediocre season by our lofty expectations. It's now been 5 years since the previous World Series win, and we're at the stage where players like Benny Matsumoto are starting to regress, and players like Nolan Gorman, who hit his 500th home run, are not so much starting caliber anymore. Same is true for Jordan Walker, whose numbers dip significantly. These long-term sims give players like Brian Kovalenko a chance, a 5th-round pick back in year 3. He ended up having a really good year as the Tigers win the World Series. In the next offseason, we have to extend Jesus Fernandez, while watch Rolando Benitez get a big contract, 5 years, $120 million. He goes to the Yankees. Steve Padilla, who left earlier, is now traded to the Chicago Cubs. And we do retain Jesus Fernandez. The team's salaries are definitely much lower at this stage. The CPU is basically handling everything. And in this year, we only win 74 games. And it seems our time at the top has about run up. The star power isn't really there. The offense is a shell of its former self. And now Ace Benny Matsumoto is starting to regress. His rating is now a 91 overall, and the numbers are showing now a little bit of regression. We end up seeing the Angels win the World Series against the Diamondbacks. On this team, they have Augustin Garcia. I did see when the CPU did not retain him. I thought that was annoying, but he ends up developing a bit elsewhere and becoming a starter with the Angels. We now have Daryl Moreno in Boston onto his 4th team at age 30. He had a shortened season there in 2036, got injured that year in Houston, ends up having a solid career. Geraldo Perdomo finally retires. One thing that made this tough, though, is that players will stick around for like 5 years doing nothing before retiring. Perdomo was a really fun player, though. Very happy I made that trade. In the following year, with Matsumoto declining, I love this move. We signed a Cy Young Award winner to a massive contract, even coming off a down year. But this team still kinda stinks. And the A's now have been rebuilt to win a World Series. So you're seeing some teams that in real life you're thinking are pretty bad win World Series now. A lot of teams get rebuilt. Here we have Jesus Fernandez down to 84 overall and still a lot of that massive contract left. Regression hit harder than I expected as Brian Kovalenko actually does reach that ceiling some of you said he had. A lot of you were excited about that pick when I made it, and now it's finally coming through. Here is Nolan Gorman's trophy case. What a busy series it's been for him, but his playing days are pretty much over. Jordan Walker at 66 overall, same is true for him, ends up with 384 career home runs. 2 MVPs as well. 46 WAR. Would have been a very different series if not for his development. Tommy Troy's playing career is now over after a short peak but really good peak at the same time. 30.6 WAR as he ends his career. Victor Scott ends up becoming a pretty good everyday player for about 4 or 5 years after leaving St. Louis, something I did not see coming at all, and got that big contract. The Cardinals, though, they pop back up this season and they go back to the postseason. We have Christopher Rodriguez leading the team. He was a 4th-round pick in year 4 with 92 potential. He was drafted as a 53, so it took a while. Matsumoto is now a 79. His career now is just about all wrapped up. And we get bounced in the 1st round again, getting swept in the wild card. So the Cubs knock us out. And they end up with Steve Padilla, productive in that game, by the way, winning the World Series. So another ring for Padilla, just outside of St. Louis. Really good player, man. Should have never let him go. We have another Hall of Famer this year. It's Gunnar Henderson, who goes in as an Atlanta Brave with 500 plus home runs. At this point, I was basically waiting for Nolan Gorman to retire. Because at this point, I don't know the roster. I'm not really attached to it beyond guys like Benny. I wanted to see some numbers, but I went through these years as quick as I possibly could. And now we see the Rockies win the World Series and their division, something they've never done before. But they built up a really impressive pitching staff, actually, something I wouldn't have thought in Colorado. we don't make it to the postseason this next year, the White Sox are champions. So in this long-term sim, you've got the White Sox, the Angels, the A's, the Rockies winning World Series. There is some hope after all, everybody. Dylan Carlson has decided to retire after waiting for me to see if I'd bring him back again. Is the Dylan Carlson saga on this channel finally complete? Steve Castilla retires after never playing with St. Louis as our #1 pick in the series. He ended up being an okay player, but a disappointing one who never reached that all-star peak that I thought he'd have. A lot of players make it to the Hall of Fame this year. 5 get inducted, including Yordan Alvarez and Colson Montgomery. Benny Matsumoto's playing days are done. He ended up with a really good career. Only a one-time All-Star, never won a Cy Young, so always like a top 10 guy at his peak, but never like a top-tier #1 pitcher. Still, Nolan Gorman is not retiring. He refuses. We go through another year, we get eliminated by the Brewers, and the Rockies have won their 2nd ring. And guess what? Spencer Torkelson makes it to the Hall of Fame. They signed him much earlier in the long-term sim, and that's what came of it. Every year, I just wanted to see, would Nolan Gorman finally retire? We got guys like Richard Leonard now retiring. 83 career saves, 500-plus innings. Really good, solid career for Leonard. And Nolan Gorman, meanwhile, he ain't retiring. We're going year after year, back in the postseason now. Yup, swept again. Giants win the World Series. Gorman is just hanging around for like 7 years, not retiring. So now we're in the year 2046. Back in the postseason. That's actually 2 in a row, but still can't make it out of that first round. The next year, 2047, we make it back to the postseason and do win that first round against San Diego. We end up going to the World Series, and the Cardinals are victorious. So while I'm waiting for Nolan Gorman to retire, I don't know a single player on the team. I didn't bring any of these players there. The oldest had arrived in 2034. All the while, Nolan Gorman had still not retired. Darren Cortez was now the face of the St. Louis Cardinals, a 29-year-old outfielder who had himself a breakout season, a great postseason run. We have some more retirements, and Elly De La Cruz makes it to the Hall of Fame. So every offseason I'd look to see, okay, where is Gorman now? And he's nowhere to be seen. Nolan Gorman retired. I didn't see it because those retirement lists are hundreds of names long. And Nolan Gorman, despite being a 500 home run hitter with all those accolades, never made it to the Hall of Fame. And I have no idea why. But what a way to end things. The Cardinals win one more World Series, and that wraps up the Cardinals franchise. I just want to know why Gorman didn't make it to the Hall of Fame, unless I missed it, but I went year over year and I saw the Hall of Fame lists and most of the years were empty. But that is how this series ends. So many great careers and great players in the Cardinals franchise, and I can't wait to do it again. I'm going to take a break for a while now and wait up for the spring and come back ready for hopefully my best franchise yet on MLB The Show. Thank you for all your support in this series. Please leave your thoughts, your feedback down below in the comments, and your favorite players and or moments from the franchise. Take care, everybody. I'll see you back in the spring for more MLB The Show.